now, organisms, in fact, mutate all the time, and this is actually not unusual. The reason why these herbicides were introduced was actually because weeds had developed resistance to previous chemicals that were being used. So weeds are constantly developing resistance. And it's not surprised that weeds develop resistance, because weeds have incredible capacity to basically adapt to changing conditions. And the response to this, which is basically to diversify the tools that are used to controlling weeds, that's the response, which is to do more science rather than do less. This is very important for Africa. Weed control is very important for Africa, because African farmers, especially small-scale farmers, spend roughly 200 hours a year weeding 1 hectare of land. And so the biggest challenge to African agriculture is actually controlling weeds. And we are going to be seeing more research going into weed control in terms of expanding the portfolio of options. Very quickly on health, one of the arguments that's been used by people who have questioned legitimately whether these products are safe or not, and I can talk in greater detail about the methodology for determination of safety, has always been that there have been no feeding studies, and that's been used to challenge and even to claim that companies have put these products on the market without even testing them. Between 2002 and June, roughly mid-June of this year, there had been roughly 602 feeding studies carried out worldwide that had been documented. The reason why we haven't had much evidence from these feeding studies is that many of them had not been published in peer-reviewed journals. And if they are not published in peer-reviewed journals, people who have some credibility to protect from a scientific point of view are not going to cite them. But now we are starting to see reviews of material that has come from peer-reviewed journals. This is a synthesis of available evidence. And you can see from the summary of the conclusions of this review of existing published material, it's again confirming the European Union basically findings that the risk profile is similar to the risk profile of conventional crops. This is looking at crops that are on the market today. This does not include crops that have not been developed. If you develop new crops, you have to assess their risk profile separately. And so what's the outlook? What does the future look like in terms of biotech products? Look at the photograph at the top. That was March 2000 in the UK, activists destroying field trials. The photographs at the bottom is April of this year, protests outside wheat field trials in the UK. You can see the difference between the top and the bottom. At the top, you see actual destruction, actual vandalism against research. The bottom photographs, and this year's protests, very civil. People expressing concerns, even though they had promised to threaten to destroy the wheat trials, but they protested civilly. The other new difference is that in 2001, between 1999 and 2002, when you had this silly season of destruction of GM crops across Europe, the police were never involved to stop it. If you look at the bottom left-hand side, so the right-hand side, you see the presence of the police. So governments are starting to protect scientific infrastructure. Why are they doing that? Because they now recognize the value of these products. And if anybody wants to look even into greater detail, you can now monitor statements by British politicians who are now coming out in the public and saying, I overstated the case in 2001. The consequences of these products are not as bad as I thought 2001. One of those was the UK Minister for for Environment, Honorable Michael Meacher, who was very strongly opposed to these products. He was Minister for Environment between 2001 and 2004. And if you Google him, M-E-A-C-H-E-R, Michael Meacher, he is on a BBC in February 24th. He offered a very candid interview in which he also admitted that he had been sacked from cabinet by Tony Blair for being so strongly opposed to genetically modified crops, and that when he looks back, the consequences have not been as dramatic as he had feared then. So there's a kind of a revision of the position. Of course, it's significant that UK is carrying out field trials of genetically modified crops. UK wouldn't do that if they did not intend, in fact, to grow them. So we are going to see, in fact, an increase of this taking place in Europe. A decade ago, that was the attitude adopted by regulators, especially in Europe. You worried about safety, somebody might steal your bicycle, you put there so many locks that you are actually incapable of using it yourself. That's really what happened, especially in Europe, and then Europe exported that approach to other countries that are still continuing to adopt very restrictive policies. I'm not proposing here that you should always leave your bicycle to be stolen, but I think that's a little excessive. The concern now is whether biotech products contribute to an improvement of the ecological footprint of human activity. So we're moving towards thinking about how you use biotechnology to promote sustainability. This is why countries like the UK are actually moving into second generation of GM products. Some are calling them green GM products, because the focus of it is to reduce, in fact, ecological impacts. Going back to the idea that the next wave of economic transformation is actually going to be a green wave, and thinking of that, countries are starting to think about how to incorporate biotechnology as part of that package of tools to promote green development. This is early this year, the European Union launched their 2030 strategy on what they call the bioeconomy, the European bioeconomy. Again, look very carefully at the bottom of that slide. You'll see that the technologies that they would like to use to promote this transition towards green growth include, in fact, biotechnology, which is what explains this shift in attitude in Europe, and has led me to the view that we're going to see more research on biotechnology being carried out in Europe, because of this recognition that it has ecological benefits. Now, this is different. Nobody would have anticipated, even 7 years ago, that this would be the kind of strategies being adopted by Europe that explicitly accommodate biotechnology. And I can talk to you in a greater detail if you're interested, what kinds of investments are being made by different European countries. It's across the board, not just agriculture. It's in agriculture, it's in health, and it's in industrial application. But really looking at the potential of biotechnology in lowering basically the ecological footprint, mostly around carbon, reducing the carbon footprint. We are seeing a similar trends with African countries taking a very different route, which is focusing mostly on the immediate agricultural challenges. Those are areas, 4 areas, with starting off with bananas in Uganda, cowpeas in Nigeria, weed control, particularly striga in the Sudan, and drought tolerance in Kenya and the neighboring countries. These are areas of biotechnological endeavor that are really focusing on solving immediate problems. And this, Nigeria, for example, spends something like $500 million a year importing chemicals to control cowpea pests. And the technology has already been developed. There's a biotechnology bill that is sitting as we speak on the desk of the President of Nigeria. And in the next year or so, probably even later this year, we're going to see some movement taking place in Nigeria in this area. These are just examples. There are probably 15 or 20 major initiatives among African countries. What is unique about them is that they are really focusing on solving local problems, and they are not hypothetical problems. Banana is a staple in Uganda. Cowpeas are a staple in West Africa. Corn is a staple in East Africa and many other countries. So these are technologies that are being addressed at solving real problems. These are also problems that are very difficult to solve using conventional methods. And the science is advancing in that the latest studies in the science have shown that, in fact, the next wave of the development of pharmaceutical products is going to come from a better understanding of plant biology. We are almost going back to almost herbal medicine. Herbal medicine is now acquiring completely new meaning in that the research is moved from just sequencing the genomes and characterizing them to trying to understand the metabolic pathways that allow plants to create certain chemicals. And the interests now of science is how do you harness those chemicals for medical purposes. So the signal here is that the next wave of discovery of medical applications is going to be driven by plant scientists. And those countries that are investing in plant biotechnology, initially for agriculture, are the ones that are going to be doing, in fact, biomedical research. And it's partly because of this convergence of the sciences. And that's why this field is particularly important, that it goes beyond just whether you like GMOs or not. It's very profound in terms of whether Africa can ride the next wave of economic transformation. I'm sure there will be questions about labeling, so I'll skip that. I wanted to just conclude by, again, making a case, going back to my original point about what's happening in a number of countries, with the heads of state actually taking responsibility and leading the process. And I expect this is connected mostly with my work as an advisor to the African Union of encouraging African presidents to really start paying more attention to the role of innovation in development. Please don't ask me who the hairdresser for that lion is. I am the hairdresser. It's my job to make African presidents look good. That's the job of my panel. And so I want to conclude by showing my favorite slide. I show this not very often, which is that zebra. When I show that zebra on that motorbike, lawyers particularly, Peter Wanyama, I'm sorry, these are lawyers from the Harvard Law School, have always asked me, at what speed is that zebra going? And I say it's going about 60 miles an hour. And they say, it's so stupid, it should be wearing a helmet. This is the case. They're worried about the risks that zebra is taking. And that really parallels the kind of arguments we have about new technologies, where people start to focus mostly on the immediate risks, but they are not broadening the profile of risk to know why is that zebra on a motorbike. That's the interesting thing. That zebra is on a motorbike for very practical reasons. That if that zebra wasn't on a motorbike, it would be the lioness's dinner that evening. And I offer you this analogy because when we think about the challenges we face today and we look at specific products, we need to be thinking about something else. Are there risks associated with doing nothing? Because most of the time we think that risks only come with doing something. But I would like to argue that where Africa sits today, there are more risks if Africa does nothing than there are if it does something. And that something is an investment in new technologies that include biotechnology. So I want to leave you with that message. I know I've spoken longer than I expected, but I thought it would be useful to really lay out the argument a lot more clearly. And I'm open to questions, comments, insults. You can insult me if you like. I come from a wrestling community in Western Kenya. That space, I can also use it for wrestling. So I'm open to everything. And so Maybe there's a microphone. We can just pass the microphone